Part 28. The Original Vampire. Author, Ludo Busrud. Chapter 273. Under the rays of the setting sun, the majestic Lion's Roar castle looked even more desolate. On an open-air balcony of the main castle, Colin was standing side by side with Vera, admiring the sunset. Vera today wore a palace-style tube top and waist dress, revealing her round shoulders and slender neck. Her long golden hair was rolled up casually, and her white and smooth skin made people unable to help but have the urge to kiss. The afterglow of the setting sun outlined her perfect profile, making Colin look a little lost in thought. "What are you looking at?" Vera turned her head and smiled sweetly at her husband. "I'm looking at the future Duke of the North," Colin joked with a smile. Vera rolled her eyes cutely, with a hint of worry in her tone. "There is still a rebellion in the north. What's more, I don't know if His Majesty the Emperor and the Senate will agree to my inheriting the position of Duke." Kalin was about to untie his wife when he heard footsteps coming from behind. Immediately, Busty, the new butler of the St. Hilda family, came to the balcony and bowed to report. "Miss, Viscount Angelette, the dwarf envoy has been brought." Vera turned around slowly and nodded. She said, "Okay, invite him to come over." Colin also turned around and saw a familiar dwarf walking in. "Dear Miss Vera, Viscount Angelette, and Anka, son of the Marquis of Menem, I would like to extend my most sincere greetings to you." Colin heard the other party's name and self-introduction and then remembered that he was there. "I have seen this Earl of Anka in Ice Rock City." He had just returned from the Troll Empire and met the Dwarf Count at the triumphal banquet. The other party also proposed to replace the territory of the Angelette family with part of the territory of the Menem family in the Scarlet Flame territory. "Count Anka, please sit down." Vera returned the greeting and then invited the other party to sit down at the small round table on one side of the balcony. The maid brought coffee and desserts at the right time. Colin also sat down at the table, took a sip of coffee, and asked with a smile, "Count Anka, are you here because of the territory exchange?" Earl Anka choked slightly and then spoke briefly. Dai shook his head in embarrassment and said, "No, moreover, the matter of changing the territory is based on your own will. If you are not willing, our Menham family will certainly not force it." Colin raised his eyebrows and expressed his weak attitude towards Earl Anka. Somewhat surprised. When he was in Ice Rock City, the dwarf earl was quite arrogant. One moment he said that he would never let the Angelette family suffer, and the other moment he said that the Menem family's army was about to arrive in the north. He almost pressed Colin's hand. Let him sign and agree. There must be a reason for Earl Anka's change of attitude now. Could it be that the dwarves feel that they cannot capture Winter City, and are they preparing for peace talks? Then why did you come to Winter City this time? Count Anka glanced at Vera and saw that she had been drinking coffee silently and nibbling on desserts. She seemed to have no interest in this conversation. This attitude made Count Anka immediately understand that Viscount Angelette was the real master of Winter City. "Miss Vera, Viscount Angelette, I came here this time to reach a peace agreement with you and bring an end to the chaos in the north." "Peace agreement?" Colin raised his eyebrows. He took a serious look at Count Anka. The dwarves actually wanted to make peace. Colin began to make calculations in his mind. In fact, Colin was wavering between war and peace at this time. The original plan given by Maester Dawn was indeed a prudent one, but after the Running River severely weakened the Dawson family, and then harvested the Uman family's army in Winter City, Colin already had the confidence to fight against the dwarf army. Therefore, he rode to Ice Rock City and asked the main force of the Black Cavalry Army and the Silver Moon Guards to come here. But unexpectedly, just when he was gradually inclined to fight to the death with the dwarf suddenly gave up. This made Colin feel as if he were punched in the air. "Tell me about your conditions." Colin decided to take a look at the situation first. Earl Anka perked up and immediately spoke, "Your Majesty the Viscount, the Minim family has no intention of becoming an enemy of the St. Hilda family and is very willing to see a peaceful and stable northern territory. Therefore, as long as you can agree to our independent establishment of a country upon request, the dwarf army outside the city will be withdrawn immediately. The St. Hilda family will also receive the eternal friendship and gratitude of the dwarves. Colin rubbed his chin. Of course, he would not be surprised by this condition. This group of dwarves followed. Isn't it just for this goal that Sir has been making trouble for so long? But why did they voluntarily give up on the St. Zion family and start seeking cooperation with the St. Hilda family? Colin immediately realized that something must have happened to the other camp. Otherwise, the dwarves could not have just laid siege to the city without even making a tentative attack and then plan to negotiate peace. Do you want to establish an independent country in the north? Yes. Where is the scope of the territory? Count Enka was already prepared. After hearing this, he immediately took out a map from his arms, spread it on the table, and introduced. Miss Vera, Viscount Angelette, please see, this is the area of the dwarf kingdom we are planning. It includes the current territory of the Dawson family, as well as the territories of the Longbow family and the Billy family. Please rest assured that except for the Dawson family, the other northern lords have agreed to exchange territories with the Maynham family. Wait. Colin immediately interrupted Count Enka and asked, agree, who agreed that they would exchange territory with the Maynham family? Earl Enka's heart skipped a beat, and he said cautiously, Viscount Angelette, these lords have all agreed, and we also obtained permission from Emperor Reinhardt. Colin was unmoved and said coldly, what about the St. Hilda family? Have you forgotten who is the master of the north? Earl Enka smiled apologetically and said, that's why I came to Winter City, because I wanted to get the approval of the St. Hilda family. When Vera heard this, she didn't even raise her head. She seemed to have no interest in Count Enka's proposal. Colin placed the coffee cup heavily on the table and said in a bad tone, Count Enka, your Maynham family has just arrived. When I came to the north, I was prepared to take away such a large territory and establish an independent country. I am afraid I have never paid attention to the St. Hilda family. The corner of Earl Enka's mouth twitched slightly as if he were suppressing the anger in his heart, but he still forced a smile and defended. How could it be? The Maynham family has always respected the St. Hilda family, and the founding of the country was also approved by Emperor Reinhardt. Moreover, after the founding of the country, the dwarf kingdom will become the eternal partner of the St. Hilda family. Partner, Colin smiled coldly. But the St. Hilda family doesn't need partners like you. If you are a vassal, you can still consider it otherwise. If you, the Maynham family, swear allegiance to the St. Hilda family, the North will accept you to settle here. Earl Enka's face also darkened, as if he had lost patience with Colin, so he turned to Vera and asked directly. Miss Vera, is this what you mean? Vera then raised her head, looked at Count Enka calmly, and nodded seriously. This is what I mean, and it is also the will of the St. Hilda family. Earl Enka was finally irritated. He immediately stood up and said loudly. I came with peaceful goodwill, but I didn't expect that what I received was strong hostility. Miss Vera, Viscount Angelette, I already understand what you mean. I will definitely tell my father and let him make the decision. Thank you for your hospitality, and farewell. After that, Earl Enka gave a perfunctory salute and then strode away. Looking at the other persons retreating back, Colin frowned and said to Vera beside him. I think the dwarves are afraid something happened, otherwise, they would not have come to negotiate peace with us so early, and their attitude was very low when they first came up. I deliberately provoked him several times before finally getting him angry. Vera chuckled, patted Colin's arm, and said with a smile, I felt weird just now too. Is this still a dwarf who is famous for his bad temper? I have tolerated you for so long. It seems that the other party is really anxious to negotiate peace with us. Kalin stretched his waist and said leisurely, whatever the enemy wants to do, we can't let them succeed easily, so, don't be in a hurry, let's talk slowly. If they really want to negotiate peace, they will come again. Vera's eyes flashed, and she thought for a moment and said, I think the incident on the dwarf side may be related to the arcane fluctuation I noticed in the morning. Oh, Colin's heart moved. Then do you understand what happened outside the city that time in the morning? It's too far away, I don't know what it is. Vera shook her head, but then she suggested, maybe you can ask the teacher. Mage Cusius. Kaelin thought for a while, nodded and said. Okay, I'll go see if he knows. The Original Vampire. Author, Lugo Busroot. Chapter 274. When Colin found Master Cusius, he was teasing a canary. Leisurely and leisurely, like a retired old man. Ever since the 6th level mage encountered Colin and others, he followed them all the way, but he also suffered a lot. Although the other party confessed his connection with Mr. Jin and even handed over a casting scroll of Eye of Judgment, Colin was still wary of Cusius. Now that the situation in the north is gradually improving, Colin is also preparing to have a showdown with this person. You can't just keep this guy, who doesn't know whether he's a friend or an enemy, by your side and not deal with it. Good evening, Mr. Cusius, you are in such good spirits. Good evening. Viscount Angelette Cusius turned around and invited Colin to sit down. After some pleasantries, Cusius pointed it out directly, the Viscount is here for the arcane fluctuations outside the city this morning, right? Colin nodded and asked, yes, I want to ask for advice, you know what's going on. Cusius shook his head. I'm sorry, Lord Viscount, I'm actually curious about what happened outside the city, but it's so far away that I can only know that someone released an extremely powerful spell, but I can't guess more things. Colin was slightly disappointed, but then asked, is it extremely powerful? How powerful? Is it possible that it is a forbidden spell? It is possible. But, Mr. Viscount, releasing the forbidden curse is not that simple. A trace of struggle appeared on Cusius's face, but it was quickly replaced by determination. You must have been curious about why I abandoned Mr. Jin and turned to the St. Hilda family. Colin was slightly startled, obviously not expecting that the other party would take the initiative to pierce the window paper. Although Colin had previously suspected that Cusius was involved in Mr. Jin's plan to sacrifice Falling Eagle City, he had never made it clear due to the identity of Teacher Vera. Unexpectedly, Cusius would actually admit it now. I'm a little curious, Colin said with a casual expression. Master Cusius looked at Colin's eyes seriously and said frankly, Lord Viscount, before I came to you, I met Mr. Jin once. Colin did not speak, quietly waiting for what Master Cusius would say next. Mr. Jin's condition at that time was very bad. Colin then became a little curious and asked, what's so bad? He lost his left eye, but this was actually planned because that was the price that had to be paid to release the Eye of Judgment. However, when I saw him, the entire left half of his face had been completely corroded. And, although he deliberately concealed it, I still noticed it all over his body. The shrouded death aura. So, I immediately realized that Mr. Jin still suffered the backlash of the forbidden curse. The sacrifice of Fallen Eagle City did not completely eliminate the backlash of the forbidden curse. Haha, he messed up. Colin's eyes flashed. He moved and seemed to understand something. That's why you so happily handed over the casting scroll of Eye of Judgment, because you found that this forbidden spell has not been qualitatively improved compared to other forbidden spells. It still needs the caster to pay an extremely terrible price. Cusius nodded but shook his head. Mr. Jin's state at that time really surprised me, but it would be too small to say that the Eye of Judgment has not improved qualitatively. Look at Mr. Jin. You know, the Eye of Judgment is a veritable 8th level forbidden spell that can kill a paladin instantly. If a forbidden spell of this level is to be used with normal methods, I'm afraid 7 or 8 6th level mages will be needed. Only by jointly casting spells and sacrificing one's own life can the spell be cast. But Mr. Jin was able to cast the spell successfully by himself without dying on the spot. This is already a great success. Hearing this, Colin smiled coldly. Retorted, on your own, have you forgotten the 300,000 people of Fallen Eagle City? Cusius looked a little embarrassed, coughed twice, and immediately apologized. I'm sorry, Lord Viscount, I didn't mean it. The omission of those innocent lives is just from an academic research perspective, the forbidden curse developed by Mr. Jin is indeed an extremely important breakthrough. The coldness in Colin's eyes did not diminish at all. Cusius's perfunctory attitude made him understand that this was a devil with no moral bottom line in his heart, just like Mr. Jin. If the Eye of Judgment really has no backlash against the caster, this guy will definitely release it without hesitation when he finds the opportunity. However, although he had already sentenced Cusius to death in his heart, on the surface, Colin did not dwell on it any longer. When Cusius saw this, he felt relieved. Maybe in his opinion, those lowly civilians are just insignificant ants in the eyes of Colin, who is a noble. Therefore, Cusius continued, if you know Mr. Jin, you will understand that he is definitely an arcane genius. He was promoted to 6th level mage at the age of 27, directly setting a historical record in Yevili. But because the mage could not be promoted to the Holy Realm, Mr. Zhang also faced a desperate situation with no way out. So, he began to study various forbidden spells, and then he came up with the Eye of Judgment, which can be said to change the course of arcane history, a pioneering work. Colin looked at Cusius, who was caught in a frenzy, and sneered in his heart. Yes, Mr. Jin created the sacrifice and exile curse. But for the mage, it is unclear whether it is the road to glory or the prelude to decadence. Cusius continued, even if there are some mistakes, it is actually inevitable after all. This is the first time that such a brand new forbidden spell has been released, but this has already opened up a promising new way of thinking for arcane research. Since you admire Mr. Jin so much, why would you betray him? Colin interrupted the other person's compliment. Master Cusius smiled bitterly, because I think Mr. Jin's fate will be very miserable. Oh? Why? First of all, he himself suffered the backlash of the forbidden curse, and he doesn't know how long he can live. Secondly, Mayor Cusius hesitated again, but finally said, on the day the falling eagle city was sacrificed, I was actually outside the city. Mr. Jin asked me to help him block possible disturbances. I was quite surprised at the time. Who are you, sir, guarding against? Later, I discovered that Master Ernest, the Speaker of the Master Council of Yevili, actually appeared outside Fallen Eagle City. Apparently, someone informed Ernest of Mr. Jin's plan, and this person is most likely Emperor Reinhardt. Colin listened quietly, without any expression. Cusius continued, I guess that Emperor Reinhardt is actually very afraid of Mr. Jin now that he has obtained the spellcasting scroll of the Eye of Judgment and verified its effectiveness. Then, for him, Mr. Jin is of little use. Therefore, although he is constrained by his promise and will not personally send people to hunt down Mr. Jin, he is very likely to reveal Mr. Jin's whereabouts to others. Due to the terrifying nature of the Eye of Judgment with its power, there must be many people who want to kill Mr. Jin. For example, Ernest, such as Prince Lake. Outside Falling Eagle City, I helped Mr. Jin block Ernest, but Prince Lake, haha, I don't think Mr. Jin can escape his pursuit. Colin's eyes flashed and he said, do you think the arcane explosion this morning was possibly caused by Prince Lake? It is possible, Master Hughes shrugged. The last time we met, I also asked Mr. Jin if there was any way to deal with Prince Leahy's pursuit. But he didn't say anything. Or he didn't trust me enough at all. Or he didn't think of a way to deal with it himself. No matter what the case is, I don't think there is any need to follow his path into darkness. Seeing Colin sink into deep thought, Master Cusius coughed twice and, with a little hint of flattery, said, "Viscount Angelet, I have told you everything I know frankly. Please believe that when I assisted Mr. Jin before, I only wanted to understand the forbidden curse of the Eye of Judgment. What is the real effect? It is purely academic research and has absolutely no other intentions. Even at the time, I didn't know that Mr. Jin's target was actually the Duke of St. Hilda." Colin glanced at Cusius and didn't know if he believed it or not. Believe his lies. Cusius felt a little uneasy but continued, "With my relationship with Vera, of course, I will not intentionally harm Duke St. Hilda. If I knew that Mr. Jin's target was Duke St. Hilda, I would definitely do my best stop him. Ahem, I am also very sorry for the Duke's death, so to make up for it, I am willing to become the magic consultant of the St. Hilda family." Colin sneered in his heart. This guy probably saw that the situation in the north was gradually becoming clearer. The St. Hilda family was not in danger of being overthrown, so they shamelessly came forward to act as a magic consultant. However, this is probably Cusius's best retreat at the moment. He first offended Ernest, the Speaker of the Mages' Council, and then saw that Mr. Jin's side had a bleak future, so he had no choice but to decide to completely fall to the St. Hilda family. "I will forward your request to Vera." Colin suppressed the disgust in his heart and said perfunctorily with a smile. Then the two briefly chatted for a few words, and Colin said goodbye and left. Walking down the dim corridor, Colin suddenly smelled a familiar fragrance again. Turning a corner, Colin suddenly discovered that Archbishop Ajani was walking towards him. "Good evening, Viscount Angelet," Ajani smiled brightly, like 100 flowers blooming. "Good evening, Your Excellency the Archbishop." Colin always felt that the current scene had a familiar feeling. They seemed to have met by chance like this 2 days ago. "I just got some good news, do you want to hear it?" Ajani slowly walked into Colin. Under the dim light, her beautiful face flickered, exuding fatal charm. "Oh? What's the good news? Tell me." Colin stopped. But Ajani is still getting closer. The scent of roses became stronger and stronger, reaching deep into Colin's heart. Finally, Ajani stood less than half a meter away from Colin, raised her head slightly, and looked at Colin steadily with her watery peach blossom eyes. The red lips opened slightly, and she said a piece of news that shocked Colin. "Mr. Jin, he is dead. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment." The Original Vampire. Author, Logo Busroot. Chapter 275. How did you die? Although Colin had guessed this possibility before, when the news really came out of Ajani's mouth, he couldn't help but feel shocked. "Prince Lexi killed him." Ajani looked at Colin's eyes steadily, as if she wanted to find something out of it, "just this morning, in the dwarf army camp outside the city." Sure enough. Colin was calm on the surface, but there was already turmoil in his heart. Prince Lehigh, a paladin at his peak, was truly terrifying. He entered the army alone and killed a 6th-level mage, just like squeezing an ant to death. No wonder Emperor Reinhard was so afraid of this prince that he would even betray his wife and family in order to obtain a bargaining chip that could balance him. But Prince Leahy's response was indeed domineering. He went directly to Mr. Jin and killed him without ceremony. This is probably his warning to Emperor Reinhard. However, for the St. Hilda family, Prince Lehigh did help a lot. Once Mr. Jin dies, the Northern Territory will never be overturned. Apart from Mr. Jin, there is no other outstanding person in the St. Zion family. Once this pillar falls, even the other big cats and kittens will probably be so frightened that they will hunker down and not dare to show up again. Without the St. Zion family, the rebellion in the north would completely lose its source. Although the Dawson family and the Mainham family are still entrenched outside Winter City, they can no longer shake the foundation of the St. Hilda family. All the dukes in the 4 realms of the empire are from the Holy Knight family, and there has never been an exception. If the dwarves want to be this exception, they may end up extremely miserable. They are now thinking about how to persuade the Saint Hilda family to agree to the establishment of a dwarf country. It's no wonder that the dwarf envoy, Count Enka, just kept his attitude so low. Moreover, Colin became more and more convinced that even if the agreement was not reached this time, the dwarves would send an envoy again. The initiative has now returned to the hands of the St. Hilda family. Viscount Angelet, what are you thinking about? Colin came back to his senses and saw Ajani looking at him with bright eyes, her blue eyes full of inquiry. I'm thinking about how to deal with the remaining rebels. Have you thought about it? Colin smiled and asked, Your Excellency, Archbishop, what do you think should be done about the dwarf rebels? Ajani's face was indifferent, with a dreamy color floating in her beautiful big eyes. She said piously, The Lord of Glory appreciates forgiveness, but he also values punishment. Forgiveness earns praise, but punishment earns awe. Colin Waiwei, with a smile, understood what Ajani meant. In fact, the Archbishop has been encouraging the St. Hilda family to fight to the death with the dwarf coalition from beginning to end. When Erluman took control of Winter City, she had the same attitude. Do you have any grudges with the dwarves? Colin asked with a smile. Ajani shook her head and said, I have no prejudice against dwarves. However, I don't want to see the establishment of the dwarf kingdom. Oh. Why? Ajani did not answer directly this time but asked, Viscount Your Excellency, are you willing to see the dwarves establish an independent country in the Northern Territory? Of course I don't want to, because this is the North. Whether it is as a Northern Lord or as Vera's husband, I have reasons. Oppose any attempt to split the Northern Territory. But what are your reasons? Faced with Colin's doubts, Ajani's eyes flashed, and she said softly, As the Archbishop of the Northern Territory, I certainly don't want to see a person being divided into the Northern Territory. I see. Colin nodded slowly, understanding Ajani's motives. Then we are allies. Of course. Ajani nodded, showing her perfect smile again. Colin's mouth went dry when he saw it, but he soon calmed down, maintained due vigilance, and asked again. Then, as an ally, shouldn't we also contribute to preventing the dwarves from establishing a country? The smile on Ajani's face became even brighter, and coupled with the rich holy aura surrounding her body, she looked even more charming. Your Excellency, Viscount, how do you want me to contribute? Colin took a deep breath, but his nose was full of the strong scent of a mature woman. You were able to learn the news that Prince Lakesy killed Mr. Jin so quickly, right? There are spies in the dwarf army. Ajani was slightly startled, but then she regained her composure and said calmly, The Lord of Glory is here. There are loyal believers in every corner of the world. This should be considered an admission. However, Colin did admire the Radiant Church's intelligence-gathering ability. He had learned about it once in Ice Rock City because of Vera, but now he didn't expect that they actually had fanatics among the dwarf army who tipped off the church. This kind of pervasive penetration is truly unexplainable. Especially among dwarves, this is even more rare. Because although the dwarves have always believed in the Lord of Glory, the Lord has not given them the glory they deserve. They cannot be baptized and become knights. Therefore, the proportion of fanatical believers among dwarves is definitely not high. But even so, the dwarf army outside the city still seemed to have taken off their clothes in front of the church, with no secrets at all. I need to borrow your loyal believer, Colin suggested with a smile. Ajani looked hesitant and said hesitantly, What do you want to do? You know, this believer has taken a lot of risks in order to deliver news to the church. I can't let him be sacrificed casually. It's not that he can't be sacrificed. Sacrificed, rather, cannot be sacrificed arbitrarily. Colin understood what the other party meant. This is because I am worried that my method is unreliable. Don't worry, of course I won't let the faithful believers of the Lord die. Then what are your plans? Colin smiled slightly and suddenly leaned into Ajani's ear. The beautiful archbishop was startled, and just as he was about to retreat and distance himself, he heard Colin whispering in his ear and then stayed where he was. But her small and exquisite ears turned pink at a speed visible to the naked eye. Colin sneered in his heart. You kept teasing me, now it's my turn to fight back. Moreover, this archbishop, who has always maintained a holy and pious posture, is not really calm and has no mortal desires. After talking about his plan, Colin distanced the two of them again and showed what he thought was the most gentlemanly smile to the rosy-faced Ajani. But when this smile fell into Ajani's eyes, it looked particularly hateful. As if she were quite angry at her gaffe just now, Ajani glared at Colin fiercely. But she didn't know how seductive this glance was. How sure are you that you can succeed? Colin crossed his arms and smiled confidently. Since I dare to make such a suggestion, I am sure enough, Your Excellency. Archbishop, do you have no confidence in me? Ajani stared at Colin for a moment and finally nodded. Of course, I have confidence in you. Okay, Colin stretched out his hand. Happy cooperation. Happy cooperation. Ajani did not hesitate and stretched out her hand to talk to Kaelin Xiangzi. The warm and soft touch made Colin's heart beat faster. But unfortunately, Ajani only shook hands with Colin gently and then immediately took away her delicate hand. Colin felt disappointed. When he saw the other party turning around to leave, he spoke again. By the way, Your Excellency the Archbishop, the Duke's body has been delayed for too long. Vera and I both hope that you will hold a funeral for him as soon as possible. Ajani suddenly stopped and stared at Colin again with her big blue eyes. She actually sensed something was wrong when the Duke's body first entered the city. Moreover, she also heard from Count Uman that the Duke's body was switched, so Colin's intention was obvious. This was because he was worried about the discovery of the body and planned to bury it as soon as possible so as to give a final conclusion to the Duke's death. Colin didn't seem to have any guilty conscience and looked at Ajani openly, as if he had no selfish intentions and just hoped that Duke St. Hilda could be buried as soon as possible. Finally, a smile broke out on Ajani's pretty face again, and she nodded. Okay, after the dwarf rebels are dealt with, I will conduct the funeral for Duke St. Hilda. The Original Vampire. Author, Logo Busroot. Chapter 276. As expected by Colin, the dwarves sent envoys into Winter City again the next day. It was an old acquaintance who came, Count Anka. Both times, people from the Maynham family came to Winter City to negotiate, which was enough to show that Marquis Dawson had been marginalized in the dwarf army at this time. This time, Vera and Colin met Count Anka in the flower room. Of course, it was Colin who actually led the negotiations. Vera was concentrating on playing with the blood roses she had recently planted. Viscount Angelet, I have conveyed Miss Vera and your wishes to my father. My father can also understand your concerns. However, please believe that our dwarf family has no intention of becoming an enemy of the St. Hilda family. However, our will to establish an independent country is equally firm. In order to make up for the losses in the north, my father is willing to cede part of the territory. At this point, Count Anka took out a marked map of the north and showed it to Colin. Starting from the running river to the poplar forest, we are willing to transfer it to the St. Hilda family unconditionally. In addition, the Dwarf Kingdom will sign an alliance treaty with the north. As long as Duke St. Hilda lives, the dwarves will definitely send troops to assist. Moreover, the Maynham family will hand over 1.5 million gold coins to the St. Hilda family every year. Viscount Angelet is the tax that a normal marquis pays to the lord every year. So, except for nothing, in addition to swearing allegiance to the St. Hilda family, the Maynham family has basically fulfilled the obligations of a vassal in the north. You can even think that the Dwarf Kingdom is still part of the north, and we dwarves are still part of the north. People. Colin rubbed his chin and fell into deep thought. It has to be said that the Minim family has indeed made great concessions in order to reach reconciliation with the St. Hilda family. However, Colin was still not satisfied. No matter if it is the so-called alliance agreement, the annual tribute, or even the ceded territory, nothing can change the fact that the dwarves want to divide the north. As long as the dwarf king does not swear allegiance to Duke St. Hilda, the St. Hilda family will have no binding force on the dwarves, and the dwarf kingdom will still be a separatist force. These conditions are not enough. Colin shook his head indifferently. Count Anka pursed his lips and asked patiently, "Then what other conditions do you want? We can discuss it." Colin said lightly, "I want the dwarf king to accept the canonization of Duke St. Hilda and submit to St. Hilda Duke's sworn allegiance." "This is impossible," Count Anka refused without hesitation. "The dwarf king will only swear allegiance to Emperor Reinhardt." Colin shrugged, spread his hands, and said, "Then there's no need to talk." Count Anka resisted the urge to beat Colin, took a few deep breaths, and said in a deep voice, "Viscount Angelet, our dwarf family came with good intentions, but I didn't expect that you would. Our good intentions are being wasted. You know, we dwarves have been waiting for thousands of years for the founding of our country. Please don't underestimate our determination. Don't think that the dwarves will only compromise. Our axes are still sharp, and our warriors are still eager. Blood." Colin looked at Count Anka quietly, who was on the verge of going berserk, and suddenly laughed and said, "Is Mr. Jin dead?" Count Anka suddenly choked. His big round eyes rolled around a few times before he nodded helplessly and said, "Yes. Prince Lake killed Mr. Jin in public, so he couldn't hide it." Count Anka also knew that the news would come sooner or later. "I was informed by Winter City. But I didn't expect it to be so fast. The reason why the Mainham family is so eager for peace talks is that they hope to negotiate everything before the news of Mr. Jin's death is known to the St. Hilda family. Unfortunately, it's still a step too late." Earl Anka sighed secretly, finally understanding the reason why Colin was so tough. Seeing the other party's face gradually darkening, Colin smiled and took the map of the north, drew a new circle on it, and said, "I can agree to the founding of the dwarves, but the territory you promised to cede just now is not enough. I want this piece." Count Anka looked over quickly, but then frowned tightly and said hesitantly, "Viscount Angelet, this piece you painted, is the Marquis of the Dawson family, right?" "Yes," Colin said matter-of-factly. Earl Anka narrowed his eyes and shook his head. "This is impossible. The Dawson family will not agree to such conditions." Colin laughed and said, "But it is not the Dawson family who is negotiating with me now." And Earl Ka finally understood what Colin meant. He was encouraging the Minim family to betray their allies. The dwarf earl lowered his head and remained silent, struggling in his heart. Seeing this, Colin spoke again, "France Dawson betrayed Marquis Garcia and betrayed the Black Cavalry. Such hatred cannot be forgiven by the St. Hilda family. Therefore, if you want to reach an agreement with us, the Marquis Dawson must be handed over. Moreover, you dwarves must be deeply ashamed of such a traitor. Could it be that the Minim family is preparing to establish the dwarf kingdom with such a person? Oh, by the way, I also heard that Marquis Dawson claims to be the inheritor of the Solanke family, the former dwarf king. Could it be that you are planning to push him to the position of dwarf king? What qualifications does he have to become the dwarf king?" Earl Anka blurted out with disdain. Colin smiled proudly. "Then why are you hesitating, Earl Anka?" Was silent for a long time before speaking again. "If we hand over Marquis Dawson and cede the Marquis territory, will the St. Hilda family agree to the Minim family establishing the dwarf kingdom?" "That's right." Colin nodded seriously. Count Anka seemed a little worried, so he turned his gaze to Vera. Vera just turned around and said in a deep voice, "Yes, Count Anka, this is our condition. Marquis Dawson must pay the price for his betrayal." Earl Anka was finally reassured, but he did not dare to agree to such conditions for a while. However, Judging from his reaction, he did not resist too much. After all, it was the Dawson family and the Maynham family who were betrayed. His interests were not harmed, but there was one less competitor. Seeing this, Colin felt confident and then spread out a piece of parchment, wrote down the contents of the agreement, and then handed it to Count Enka, saying, "You can take this peace agreement back to the Marquis of Maynham, and if you agree, you can sign it." Count Enka put away the parchment, nodded in agreement, and then hurried away. In the flower room, Vera put down the potted plant in her hand and asked with a little worry, "Do you think Marquis Maynham will agree to such conditions?" Caitlin smiled casually and said, "Whether he agrees or not, I have a way to deal with it." Vera was relieved. She had almost blind confidence in Colin. After all, no matter what problems she encountered, Colin had a way to avert danger and solve it smoothly. "I hope my father can execute Marquis Dawson with his own hands." Vera gritted her teeth and said angrily. The father she mentioned here, of course, refers to Marquis Garcia. "Of course there is no problem. After you deal with the dwarves, it's almost time to make an agreement with the Eastern Territory to exchange prisoners of war. You should be able to see Marquis Garcia again soon." Kindness. Vera fiddled with the rose petals in front of her, longing for her father surged in her heart. Today, Vera was wearing a milky white tube-top pleated skirt, and her long, bright golden hair had many naughty twists at the ends. The girl was fixed with a red hairband. Colin stepped forward and hugged Vera into his arms. He didn't say anything, he just caressed his wife's back. Vera also put her arms around Colin's waist and buried her face in his hot warmth. In the chest. Neither of them spoke, quietly enjoying this sweet and warm moment. On the other side, Count Enka hurried back to the dwarf camp outside the city. "Father, this is the St. Hilda family." Earl Enka handed the agreement to Marquis Maynham and lowered his voice and said, "They want Marquis Dawson." Marquis Maynham stared at the parchment in his hand, his face changed drastically, and finally, he snorted angrily. Said. "A clumsy provocation tactic." Earl Enka was stunned for a moment. Apparently, he didn't expect his father to react like this. After a while, he said, "Father, what do you mean? It might not be impossible to hand over Marquis Dawson to the St. Hilda family." "Idiot," said Marquis Maynham, cursed with hatred. "If we really sell Marquis Dawson, the dwarf coalition will immediately fall apart, and our Maynham family will also become a shame to the dwarves. By then, without the support of the Dawson family, can we still cope with the recovering St. Hilda family on our own?" When Count Enka heard this, a chill suddenly rose in his heart, and a trace of cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He stammered, then, "What should we do, Marquis?" Maynham's eyes flashed, and he said decisively, "Follow me to see Marquis Dawson." The Original Vampire. Author, Lugo Busroot. Chapter 277. The night was dark, and the dwarf camp was quiet and solemn. "Father, are you still awake at this late hour?" Marquis Dawson looked up and saw his second son, Wells Dawson, walking in. Wells has a fair face without a nose, which is unique to dwarves, and his beard is well groomed. If it were not for his short height due to racial restrictions, he would be considered a handsome boy. "It's so late, why are you here?" Marquis Dawson frowned. Marquis Dawson actually didn't like his second son. Because he felt that he was too pampered and did not have the strength and tenacity unique to the dwarves, and he was only obsessed with women. However, fortunately, Marquis Dawson's eldest son was good enough to inherit the family business, so Marquis Dawson left his second son alone. Wells was a little afraid of his father, so he approached carefully and said mysteriously, "Father, I just got some amazing news." "What news?" Marquis Dawson said indifferently and then immersed himself in reviewing. A mountain of documents piled up. Wells was a little depressed about his father's perfunctory attitude. He knows that he is not valued by his father, but he has always been unwilling to do so. Now, he feels that his chance to turn around has come. "Father, this is news that can determine the life or death of the Dawson family." Say Marquis Dawson was a little impatient. A trace of resentment flashed across Wells's face, and he whispered, "Father, I heard that the Marquis of Maynham is planning to give you to the St. Hilda family in exchange for the other party's consent to the founding of the dwarf nation." The quill finally stopped, raised his head, looked at his second son with burning eyes, and asked in a deep voice, "Where did you hear this news?" Wells' eyes evaded and he hesitantly said, "Father, you shouldn't we worry about the Maynham family's betrayal first?" Marquis Dawson glared and shouted angrily, "Stop talking nonsense, answer my question." "Yes, Archbishop Ajani sent someone to inform me." "How did she inform you? And why did she inform you?" Seeing his father's increasingly fierce eyes, Wells was so frightened that he was speechless and almost speechless. "Idiot." Marquis Dawson's hair and beard were spread out like an exposed lion. He kicked Wells to the ground, then pounced on him, grabbed him by the collar, and asked fiercely, "Are you secretly communicating with people in the church?" "Really?" Wells shook his head and nodded. Then, he was punched in the panda's eyes by his father. Wells screamed exaggeratedly, and the sound even attracted the personal guards on duty outside the tent. However, after seeing that it was a father beating his son, the bodyguard quietly slipped out again and seemed to be used to it. "Father, stop fighting," Wells cried. "I really didn't betray military secrets, really not." Marquis Dawson didn't believe such nonsense. He knew his son very well, and while beating him, he cursed. "You brainless idiot! How many times have I told you that Ajani is a beautiful, man-eating snake? How dare you secretly ask her at this time? She is courteous. What is her identity? Is this something you, a dwarf without the right to inherit a title, can expect? She is just using you. Using you." After a long while, Marquis Dawson finally seemed tired of beating him, and then he stopped. Wells collapsed on the ground, half dead, letting out feeble screams from time to time. "Say," Marquis Dawson kicked his son again. "What on earth did she tell you?" Wells hugged his scarred body and suddenly felt very aggrieved. "You didn't let me talk to Ajani. Contact me. Why do you want to know what she told me so much?" Of course, Wells only dared to slander such words in his heart. "She said, the Maynham family has reached an agreement with the St. Hilda family. As long as you are handed over, the St. Hilda family will agree to peace talks and allow the dwarves to establish a country in the north." Dawson the Marquis did not seem to be worried about his situation at all but asked, "Why is Ajani telling you this?" "Father, the situation in Winter City is actually very tense now. Although on the surface, Vera and Kay the Lins have gained the upper hand with the help of the Golden Lion Army, secretly, Master Joyce also has many supporters. Of course, these supporters do not want to see Vera successfully solve the rebellion in the north and inherit the title of Duke. And Archbishop Ajani is one of Master Joyce's supporters." Marquis Dawson looked at his son expressionlessly and asked, "So she wants to sabotage the peace talks?" "Yes." Way Earls nodded repeatedly. "She hopes to join forces with our Dawson family. This is a letter she wrote to you personally." With that said, he took out a letter from his arms and handed it to Marquis Dawson. Marquis Dawson did not read the letter but continued to look at Wells with cold eyes and ask, "Have you told the church about our situation?" Wells wanted to shake his head but looked at his father. With sharp eyes, he could only say hesitantly, "Yes, I said some things, but they are not military secrets, I swear." "What did you say?" Marquis Dawson's eyes became colder and colder. "I just told the other party that Prince Leahy killed Mr. Jin. That's all. There are so many witnesses to this matter." Even if I don't tell, the church will find out sooner or later. Marquis Dawson sighed inwardly. My son is too stupid. Such crucial information was revealed to the church. It is no wonder that the envoys sent by the Minim family wanted to negotiate peace but were met with difficulties. Because the other party knew that the most important bargaining chip on the dwarf side was gone. However, it seems that the Mainham family may really sell the Dawson family in order to reach reconciliation with the St. Hilda family. While Marquis Dawson was deep in thought, Wells was still defending himself. Father, Archbishop Ajani is actually a trustworthy person. The relationship between me and her is not what you imagined. For a holy and pious priest like the Archbishop, I only have infinite reverence in my heart, and I dare not blaspheme at all. Moreover, I can see that the Archbishop's current situation in Winter City is not good. The Lion Legion forcibly suppressed the resistance in the castle of Lion's Roar, trying to promote the adopted daughter of a mage to the position of Duke of the North. This is really ridiculous. Although Master Joyce has been temporarily suppressed, you have to believe that within the city there are many upright northern knights, and they will never allow it. Shut up, Marquis Dawson interrupted Wells impatiently. Wells shrank his head and suddenly did not dare to speak any more. You are just a pawn in the opponent's hand. Do you really think you have gained Ajani's favor? Moreover, the information provided by the opponent this time may not be true. Even if it is true, it may only be from the St. Hilda family. A divorce plan. Only a fool like you, whose mind is full of wine and beautiful women, would not understand the reason and be deceived by others. Wells opened his mouth, wanting to defend the goddess in his heart, but seeing how fierce his father was, he immediately did not dare to refute it, so he could only timidly hug his knees, like a quail caught in the rain. Seeing his useless look, Marquis Dawson became very angry. In the end, he could only sigh, wave his hands helplessly, and curse, "Go back to sleep." Yes, Wells grinned and stood up from the ground. "Get up and walk out carefully." The unkind voice of Marquis Dawson came from behind again. "Remember, if I find out that you are contacting someone from the church privately, I will break your legs." Yes, Wells quickly quickened his pace. He ran away as if running away. Marquis Dawson sighed lonely and shook his head, seeming to have lost hope in this son. Then, he picked up the letter that Wells had given him just now, ready to see what kind of pie the Archbishop Ajani had drawn for the Dawson family. After opening the letter, Marquis Dawson immediately frowned. This letter, why is it like this? Before Marquis Dawson could figure it out, there was a sound of footsteps outside the tent, followed by an announcement from the bodyguard. "Sir, the Marquis of Mainham wants to see you. Invite him in." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Original Vampire. Author, Lugo Busroot. Chapter 278. Marquis Dawson, I have taken the liberty to come here. I am not disturbing your rest, right? As soon as he came in, Marquis Mainham greeted him with a smile. Behind him, Count Anka also followed. Marquis Dawson smiled as usual and said, "Of course not." After inviting the two to sit down, Marquis Dawson ordered his guards to bring tea. Then he was not in a hurry, quietly sipping the tea and waiting for Marquis Mainham to your purpose. Not long after, Marquis Mainham took the initiative and said, "Marquis Dawson, you must also know that Anka has just returned from Winter City." Marquis Dawson glanced at Earl Anka and asked with a smile, "I wonder how the mission went? Does the St. Hilda family agree to the peace talks?" "The attitude of the St. Hilda family is worse than we imagined," Marquis Mainham sighed. Count Anka intervened at the right time. "I discovered that the St. Hilda family has already known about Mr. Jin's death. This is really beyond my expectations. Moreover, this also makes the peace negotiations extremely difficult." The Marquis of Mainham looked gloomy and said coldly, I guess someone from our side secretly passed the news to the city, otherwise the St. Hilda family would not have known about Mr. Jin's death so quickly. Although the Marquis of Dawson was worried about it in his heart, his idiot son scolded him profusely, but on the surface, he remained calm at all, and even took the initiative to change the subject. So, the St. Hilda family does not agree to peace talks. Of course, the Marquis of Mainham did not expect that this was what was happening in front of him. The good son of an ally leaked the secret and did not dwell on it. He shook his head and said, "No, the St. Hilda family is willing to negotiate." However, it put forward an extremely excessive condition. Marquis Dawson's heart moved and he immediately thought of the information his son had just brought back. He asked with a smile, "What conditions?" Marquis Menham stared closely into Marquis Dawson's eyes and said word by word, "The St. Hilda family requires I will hand you over." Marquis Dawson's expression changed, his eyes gradually became dangerous, and he said in a deep voice, "So, Marquis of Mainham, are you going to accept this condition?" Marquis of Mainham was still watching closely. He looked into Marquis Dawson's eyes but did not answer immediately. Of course, Marquis Dawson stared back without giving an inch. The two of them were like wild beasts meeting on a narrow road, engaging in eye contact before a battle of life and death. The atmosphere in the camp gradually became stagnant, and the air seemed to be almost breathless. Count Anka beside him suddenly became restless and broke out in cold sweat. At the same time, he was extremely puzzled by his father's behavior. Why did he deliberately anger Marquis Dawson? Or in the opponent's camp? Aren't you afraid of being hacked to death by the angry Dawson family guards? Just when Count Anka was about to collapse, Marquis Menham suddenly burst out laughing. Immediately, Marquis Dawson also laughed. The stagnant air resumed flowing at this moment as if everything just now was just an illusion. Count Anka was a little confused, but he also breathed a sigh of relief. "Marquis Dawson, do you think I will accept such a condition?" Marquis Mainham asked with a relaxed look. Marquis Dawson was also smiling as if he was receiving his closest friend. "Of course not, the friendship between the Dawson family and the Mainham family has been passed down for thousands of years, and they are both the hope for the revival of the dwarf family. How could we kill each other?" "That's right," Marquis Menham clapped his hands and said loudly, "that Viscount Angelet thought that such an agreement could sow discord between us. He is really too naive. Haha, since you are so candid, I won't hide it anymore. I just received a letter from Archbishop Ajani. The letter is still trying to warn me that the Mainham family is preparing to betray the Dawson family." "Oh," Marquis Menham rolled his eyes and said with a smile, "it seems that Archbishop Ajani has a very good relationship with you, and he actually helped to inform the news." Marquis Dawson waved his hand and said, "Hey, I think so. This woman has bad intentions. She probably just wants to use our Dawson family to do things for her." "Indeed," Marquis Menham nodded, "I dare not get too close to that enchanting female priest for fear of being seduced by her. You made a very wise decision to avoid her." Count Anka finally came to his senses and immediately smiled and boasted, "Yes, humans are too cunning and cunning, we dwarves should still unite and fight against foreign enemies." Marquis Menham nodded with a smile, fully agreeing with his son's words. Then he saw the letter in Marquis Dawson's hand out of the corner of his eye and asked, "This is what Ajani sent a letter?" "Yes. It's full of the same old tricks, and you're a little too young to deceive me." Marquis Dawson frankly handed the letter to Marquis Menham and said, "You want to take a look?" "Yes." "Okay." Marquis Menham was not polite and took it immediately. But then he frowned and asked, "Why are there so many corrections on it?" Marquis Dawson said unconcernedly, "Oh, this is the original I received. Haha, maybe the Archbishop is writing a letter. I was a little confused about the words." Marquis Menham glanced at Marquis Dawson suspiciously but said nothing more, but carefully read the contents of the letter. After a while, he raised his head again, returned the letter to Marquis Dawson, and said, it seems that the situation in Winter City may not be stable. Marquis Dawson nodded and said, yes, in the Lion's Roar Castle there must be some people who don't want to see Vera inherit the title of Duke. Moreover, if the information given by Mr. Jin is correct, the Uman family also has a blood feud with the Angeli family. The potential resistance forces in the city must not be underestimated. Perhaps, let's make use of it. Marquis Menham rubbed his chin, seeming to be deep in thought, and nodded after a moment. This is indeed a feasible method, but how do we contact the city? Marquis Dawson coughed slightly in embarrassment. The voice said, I have a way to contact Archbishop Ajani, but I don't think this person is trustworthy. Marquis Menham smiled casually and said, then there is no need to trust her. We and the church are using each other, that's all. You just pretend to agree to the other party's request first and see what arrangements she has for you. Marquis Dawson seemed to be interested. After thinking for a moment, he nodded and said, okay, I can find a way to contact the city and see what kind of people are there. Can the forces that are dissatisfied with Vera be brought over? Okay. I'll thank you for the hard work. You're welcome. Marquis Mainham stood up immediately and said goodbye to Marquis Dawson. The night outside the tent was dark, and there was no moon visible in the sky, only a few stars. The Marquis of Mainham and his son walked quietly. After returning to their camp, the Marquis of Mainham suddenly asked, do you think Marquis Dawson lied? Huh, Earl Anka was stunned. Probably, no. Haha, Marquis Menham sneered and said, did you see that letter? It is full of traces of alteration. Marquis Dawson said it was always like this, but I am afraid that after receiving the letter, he deliberately altered the important information. Earl Anka thought for a while, nodded, and said, it is indeed possible. Marquis Menham added, there is also the letter. Did you notice the handwriting? Earl Anka was suddenly embarrassed because he didn't pay attention to the handwriting. Don't you think it's familiar? Marquis Menham prompted. Count Anka recalled it carefully, and suddenly he had a flash of inspiration. He took out the peace agreement from his arms and said in surprise, the handwriting on that letter is the same as the handwriting on this agreement. Marquis Menham nodded. He nodded and asked again, I remember you said that Viscount Angelet wrote this agreement on the spot. Yes. I saw it written by him with my own eyes. Count Anka finally came to his senses. So, then the letter was not written by Ajani to Marquis Dawson at all, but from Viscount Angelet. Yes, Marquis Dawson must have lied. Marquis Mainham looked gloomy and added, besides, it's not the first lie he told. He also concealed other things. Count Anka asked in surprise. Do you still remember how he reacted when I told him that someone in the camp leaked the news of Mr. Jin's death to Winter City? Count Anka thought for a moment and said in shock, he didn't react, he changed the subject. Yes, Marquis Menham sneered, don't you think it's strange that he doesn't care about something as important as a traitor in the camp? Count Anka immediately said. Unless he arranged this traitor. Yes, Marquis Menham sighed and suddenly stopped. He looked back towards the direction of the Dawson family camp and said quietly. Frank Dawson, how do you expect me to trust you? The Original Vampire. Author, Logo Busroot. Chapter 279. Winter City welcomed another dwarf messenger. This is already Count Anka's third mission in a short period of time, but this time, he is not alone. Accompanying him was Earl Falco Dawson, the eldest son of Marquis Dawson. Unlike the unreliable Wells, Earl Falco, as the eldest son of Marquis Dawson, indeed has the demeanor of an heir to the Dawson family. Moreover, he is calm in his work and is highly valued by Marquis Dawson. Obviously, during this mission, the Dawson family was no longer worried about letting the Mainham family negotiate with the St. Hilda family alone. Of course, this can also be considered evidence that the Mainham family and the Dawson family are close and have thwarted the enemy's conspiracy. As for the mentality of these two dwarf families, probably only the parties involved know. However, seeing this battle, Colin decisively hid with Vera, leaving Bachelor Dawn to deal with the dwarf messenger. He knew that no meaningful progress could be made in the peace talks with both Dawson and Mainham present. So, Bachelor Dawn chatted with the two dwarf earls for a whole day, seemingly arguing with each other, and quarreling with each other. In fact, after looking back at the end, he realized that there was no consensus at all. Although Count Enka and Count Falco were angry, they had nothing to do because Bachelor Dawn had always maintained a friendly and positive attitude, as if he were sincerely willing to reach peace talks with the dwarves, but they could not agree on some conditions for the time being. During the dinner, Angelette and his wife, who had been missing all day, finally appeared. Count Enka and Count Falco struggled with each other for a while but did not receive any meaningful replies. Colin just kept saying, "Talk to Bachelor Dawn, he can completely represent the St. Hilda family." In desperation, the two dwarf counts had no choice but to give up, secretly thinking about how to deal with this seemingly friendly, but actually extremely difficult, Bachelor Dawn tomorrow. As the night wore on, somewhere in the southern district of Winter City suddenly became lively. This place was originally a deserted open space, but now there are many crude tents densely built here. The camp was surrounded by a thorny fence, and a sign was placed at the door, "Prisoner Camp." At the Battle of Running River, the Golden Lions defeated the Dawson family's river-crossing army and captured approximately 15,000 prisoners of war. After entering Winter City, these dwarf captives were placed here. Except for one meal a day to keep them hungry, no one took care of them. But tonight, someone important seems to have come to the camp. "What's wrong? What happened?" the dwarf prisoner Holmna asked his companions in a low voice. "I don't know. I asked several times but didn't get a definite answer." While he was doubting, Homian suddenly noticed that there were bursts of cheers coming from the front, as if he had received some great news. "What's going on? Are you going to let us go?" Holmes scratched his head and neck anxiously, trying to figure out what happened, but he couldn't squeeze in front. But not long after, his team leader ran back with excitement and shouted, "The St. Hilda family and the Dawson family have reached an agreement. There will be no more war, we can go home." "Really, really, can you go home?" Happiness came so suddenly that Huomn couldn't believe it for a moment. The dwarf comrades around him had already begun to howl with excitement. "Then when are we leaving?" "Tomorrow." "No, let us go later." "So soon?" Holman was excited and couldn't wait to leave this place that brought him bad memories. Sure enough, it didn't take long for the door of the prisoner camp to be completely opened, and the dwarves lined up in neat queues under the orders of the officers and slowly walked out. On the way, Homan also saw the figure of General Tumu. As a fifth-level warrior, General Tumu had high prestige in the Dawson family's army. However, after he was captured, he suddenly disappeared mysteriously, and no one knew where he went. But his reappearance at this time also made all the prisoners feel reassured. Although they hadn't had enough to eat these days, the dwarf captives still cheered up and marched forward in an orderly manner according to the orders of the Golden Lion Legion. Holman was also in the queue, looking around as he walked. Half an hour later, he found that he had arrived at the city gate. The open city gate looked dark and terrifying in the night, but in the eyes of the dwarf captives, it was the door leading to hope. When he walked out of Winter City, Huomn was finally sure that he was saved. Outside the city gate, there is also an equipment office. Every dwarf prisoner who passes there is given a weapon. Holman also got a long knife. Although his original set of leather armor and bow and arrows should not come back, a long knife still gave him some peace of mind. The atmosphere on the team gradually became warmer, and some dwarf captives even sang war songs to celebrate their new lives. There were few stars tonight, and boundless darkness enveloped the earth. On this pitch-black night, it was unknown what was waiting for these dwarf captives. Homan also sang songs in response to his comrades. His steps were brisk, and even the hunger that had been hanging over him for a while temporarily disappeared. Suddenly, the team in front stopped. In the darkness, the military orders were not conveyed smoothly enough, and there was some confusion in the team of dwarf prisoners, but they were quickly suppressed by the officers. "What's wrong?" Holmes' heart started to worry again. "We met the sentinels of the Maynham family," the team leader consoled him. Holmes was relieved and then became excited again because this meant that they were very close to the dwarf camp, and they might be able to eat hot food soon. Just when Holmes was immersed in the fantasy of food and his saliva was drooling, there was another commotion ahead. "What's wrong?" "I'll go to the front to take a look." "You guys stay where you are and don't run around," the team leader gave a few instructions and went to investigate the situation. Holmes had no choice but to wait patiently, but the hunger that had disappeared suddenly reappeared, and the attack was far more violent than before, almost making Holmes unable to control himself. As time passed, the team of dwarf captives still did not get the order to move forward. The patience of Holmes and others quickly disappeared during this endless waiting, and anxiety and anger gradually spread among the captives. "Why don't you let us go back? Why don't you let us go back?" A burst of shouting suddenly came from the front. Holmes was on the verge of breaking out when he saw the squad leader running back with an angry look on his face. "Captain, what's going on up front? The Maynham family won't let us enter the camp." "Why?" "They said they haven't received any news about releasing the prisoners, and they also said that the family envoy is still in the cold winter. There is no agreement with the St. Hilda family in the city." "Fart. We are all back, how can we not reach an agreement? If we don't reach an agreement, will the Golden Lions let us go?" Just when Holmes was indignant, the commotion in front suddenly began to escalate, with fierce fighting sounds and bursts of screams constantly heard. "We want to go home. We are not enemies. We want to see Lord Marquis Dawson." I don't know who instigated it, but in short, the dwarf captives actually confronted the people of the Maynham family. The situation is becoming more and more intense, and it is gradually getting out of control. Boom! The ground suddenly trembled, and General Tumu slammed the giant hammer to the ground, roaring, "Who dares to stop me?" After saying that, he rushed into the Maynham family's military formation. His behavior was like a spark falling into hot oil, instantly setting off a raging fire. The dwarf captives, who had become extremely anxious during the long period of hunger and waiting, broke out completely at this time. Under the leadership of General Tumu, they rushed towards the Maynham family's position one after another. The night is dark, but the killing has quietly begun. The Original Vampire. Author, Ludo Busroot. Chapter 280. What? Winter City released the prisoners. After hearing the news that the prisoners had returned, the first thing Marquis Dawson felt was not joy but shock. Because his son, Count Falco, was still in the city on a mission, how could the Golden Lion suddenly release the prisoners? Moreover, even if the conditions are negotiated, it is impossible for Count Falco and Count Enka to sign a contract with the St. Hilda family privately. So, this must be a conspiracy. Yes, Lord Marquis. But, the captives who came back seem to have had a conflict with the Maynham family. After hearing the report from the personal guard, Marquis Dawson became increasingly uneasy. After thinking for a moment, he decisively ran towards the Maynham family's camp. As soon as he entered the territory of the Maynham family, Marquis Dawson was surrounded by a group of guards. "Take me to see the Marquis of Maynham." "Okay, the Marquis of Maynham is about to see you." Looking at this group of heavily armed soldiers with stern faces, Marquis Dawson flashed a trace of anger in his heart. "Marquis of Maynham, what does this mean? If he doesn't take the initiative, are you going to send someone to arrest him?" Suppressing the anger in his heart, Marquis Dawson came to the center of the Maynham family camp. "Marquis Maynham, what do you mean?" Marquis Dawson asked angrily when they first met. I would also like to ask you, Marquis Dawson, why did Winter City suddenly release the prisoners of your family? I don't know this, but I think this is most likely a conspiracy by the St. Hilda family. Conspiracy? What conspiracy? Marquis Menham remained unmoved, looking at Marquis Dawson, still full of suspicion. Sowing discord, Marquis Dawson said in a deep voice. From the very beginning, the St. Hilda family has been trying to sow discord between us. Have you forgotten the previous peace agreement that required you to hand me over? Knowing that we can't trust each other, we have repeatedly taken advantage of this to try to divide our relationship. The capture this time is probably their conspiracy. Therefore, the more times like this, the more we must trust each other and be honest with each other. If I really wanted to betray you, I would not take the initiative to explain at this time. After hearing this, Marquis Menham's face relaxed slightly, and he seemed to believe what Marquis Dawson said. He was silent for a moment and then asked, "Then what do you think we should do now?" Marquis Dawson breathed a sigh of relief. Marquis Menham's attitude made him feel that there should be room for recovery, so he seriously suggested, "I think that the first thing we should do now is appease the prisoners who were released and not let the warriors who shed their blood for the dwarves feel cold. Then, on the one hand, we can carefully interrogate the officers among the prisoners to see what the Golden Lion Army is doing. Why release them back? On the other hand, we also need to contact Anka and Falco in the city as soon as possible." Just as Marquis Dawson was actively cooperating with Marquis Menham in an attempt to eliminate the bad consequences of this sudden release of prisoners, at the time of the impact, the development of the situation was rapidly deteriorating in an unpredictable direction. News of the release of the prisoners quickly spread in the Dawson family camp. Unlike the resistance and skepticism of the Menham family, the Dawson family must be very willing to accept these prisoners. After all, those prisoners were their comrades in arms, even relatives. But when news came that the prisoners had clashed with the Menham army, the officers of the Dawson family were immediately plunged into confusion and anger. They came outside Marquis Dawson's camp one after another and wanted to ask what happened. Why did the Magnum family attack their prisoners? But at this time, Marquis Dawson had already gone to see Marquis Menham and was not in the camp at all. Without a leader, the officers of the Dawson family suddenly quarreled. Some said they were going to rescue the prisoners, some said they had to ask about the situation first, and some said they would discuss it after Marquis Dawson came back. In short, Deo the Sen family camp was also in chaos. At this moment, Wells was pushed out by the arguing officers. As the second son of Marquis Dawson, he originally had little prestige in the military. However, under the current circumstances, Marquis Dawson is missing, and the eldest son of the Marquis, Count Falco, has not returned from his mission to Winter City. Therefore, Wells unexpectedly becomes the person most qualified to lead the Dawson family army at this moment. Although everyone knew that Wells was unreliable, a mediocre leader was better than no leader at all. If the quarrel continues like this, all the prisoners who have just been released will probably be killed. Wells was also panicking at this time. But facing the burning gazes of all the officers, he could not retreat. He had to make a decision. The huge pressure hit him, making Wells start to tremble involuntarily, sweating all over his body, and his mouth go dry. He forced himself to calm down, but he still didn't dare to take responsibility when he said the words. He just said, "I think, we still need to find my father first." The Marquis of Dawson went to the Menham family. "We have sent people to look for him, but there has been no response," an officer shouted loudly. Wells panicked even more, but then an idea suddenly appeared in his mind like lightning, causing him to blurt out, "No. I'm afraid the Marquis of Menham wants to detain his father and hand him over to the St. Hilda family. In exchange for the other party's understanding." What? This sentence immediately caused the Dawson family officers to explode. This was the first time they had heard such news. Immediately, the scene became more chaotic, but more people began to call for the dispatch of troops to retrieve Marquis Dawson and, of course, the released prisoners. At this time, Wells seemed to feel that he had figured out the whole story. The reason his father had not returned for a long time must be that he had been detained. At this moment, the glory of the Dawson family makes him change his past cowardly character and take the initiative to stand up and speak out, asking everyone to rescue Marquis Dawson. Amid the chaos and anxiety, the Dawson family finally has a unified voice. Although this voice may not lead them to a bright future, at this moment, the confused people need a direction. No matter where it leads, it is better than, it's good to circle in the dark. As a result, a loud bugle sounded in the Dawson family camp. That's the signal to attack. After hearing this voice, Marquis Dawson froze on the spot and was completely stunned. Originally, he was already on the verge of persuading the Marquis of Menem to accept the prisoners first and stabilize the situation, but now, with the sound of such a horn, the entire dwarf camp was boiling. Marquis Menham's eyes instantly became as sharp as poisonous snakes. Fran Dawson. What do you want to do? This is a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. Marquis Dawson explained, sweating profusely. Marquis Menham, those fools must have seen me not coming back for a long time and thought I was something that happened, and I did something stupid on impulse. But I hope you understand that I have absolutely no intention of confronting you, and our two families must not confront you. This will only make life for the St. Hilda family easier. Please let me go. I will definitely appease those guys who only cause trouble. Let you go back, Marquis Menham sneered. You have played tricks on me several times, do you really think I am a fool? Marquis Dawson was already very anxious. His head was sweating profusely, and there was a hint of pleading in his tone. Marquis Menem, if you hold me here, it will only make the misunderstanding bigger and the conflict more serious. Misunderstanding. May Marquis Nam's eyes were cold. When you lied to me last night, there was no trust between us. Now Winter City has released the prisoners of the Dawson family for no reason, and these prisoners actually started to attack my military formation. Haha, do you really think you can continue to deceive me? Marquis Dawson was stunned and asked doubtfully, why did I lie to you last night? However, Marquis Menham had already lied to Dawson. The Marquis lost his patience, smiled coldly, and said to his left and right, "Enter Mr. Marquis Dawson well. No one is allowed to see him without my order." Yes, a group of guards immediately stepped forward to surround Marquis Dawson. Live. Marquis of Mainham, Marquis of Mainham. Listen to my explanation. This is a conspiracy of the St. Hilda family, don't be fooled. Marquis Dawson was still shouting, but the Marquis of Mainham had stopped looking. Returned to the ground and left. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Original Vampire. Author, Logo Busroot. Chapter 281. The soft light of the crystal chandelier illuminated the main hall of the church. Count Falco stepped on the thick, light yellow wool carpet and slowly walked into the palace. It was already dark at this time, and there was only an old priest left in the church who was on duty. What can I help you with? I'm looking for Archbishop Ageni. The old priest suddenly frowned. Sorry, it's too late today. The Archbishop has taken a rest. You can come back tomorrow. For Count Falco at this time, the emeritus bishop suddenly appeared in the hall and greeted Count Falco. Please follow me. Count Falco smiled apologetically at the old priest and then followed the emeritus bishop to walk to the back courtyard of the church. During this mission to Winter City, his father, Marquis Dawson, had asked him to find a way to meet Archbishop Ageni. Although the unreliable Guy Wells often does stupid things, he has finally contacted the leader of the church in the north. Now that the peace talks with the St. Hilda family have reached an impasse, the Dawson family is ready to give the church a try. There may be some unexpected surprises on this road. Dong dong dong. The emeritus bishop lightly knocked on the door, and a lazy voice came from inside, "Come in." "Count Falco, please." The emeritus bishop smiled and stretched out his hand. "Thank you, Your Excellency, Bishop." Count Falco smiled at the emeritus bishop and then opened the door and entered. This room should be the Archbishop's special reception room. Although the decoration inside is not luxurious, it is quite exquisite. As soon as Falco entered the door, he saw the back of Archbishop Ajani. She was standing quietly in front of the window, looking at the dark night sky in the distance. Perhaps because she is not in public, the Archbishop tonight is not wearing a priest's robe but a purple dress. The dark clothes form a strong contrast with her white skin, which further highlights her unearthly temperament, like a descendant of the world. Angel. On the windowsill next to Ajani, there was a crystal vase with half a bottle of water in it. There was a bouquet of purple irises in the water, which just matched the color of Ajani's clothes. The evening breeze outside the window blew the iris petals, spreading an intoxicating fragrance into the room. "Good evening, Count Falco." Ajani did not turn around, just lowered her head and fiddled with the petals of the iris. But just such a back view made Count Falco's heart beat faster and his mouth went dry. He finally understood why his brother was so obsessed with this woman. "Good evening, Your Excellency the Archbishop. I am taking the liberty to visit you. I hope I will not disturb your rest." Ajani pointed sideways at a small round table in the room and said softly, "Don't be so nervous, sit down and have something to drink." Count Falco thanked him, sat down at the table, picked up the teacup, and took a sip. The bitter taste cheered up Count Falco slightly. When he saw Ajani looking out the window in a daze, he spoke again. "Your Excellency, the Archbishop, I came to you this time mainly because I wanted to thank you for my father's delivery last time." The news. Although the Marquis of Menham has not been deceived by the St. Hilda family, the Dawson family still thanks you for your kind reminder. Really? The relationship between the Menham family and the Dawson family really makes me surprised. Because Ajani's back was turned to Count Falco, he couldn't see her expression, so he smiled and nodded. "Don't worry, our dwarf family has been fighting for this common goal for thousands of years, isn't it, Jane? A simple provocation can divide our alliance." At this time, there was a faint noise outside the window, and the expression on Ajani's face became very exciting. Although Count Falco was a little curious about what the noise was about, he couldn't go to the window to take a look. It would be too rude, so he had to suppress his curiosity for the time being and continued. "Your Excellency, Archbishop, now follow me. The negotiations between the St. Hilda family have reached an impasse. So I thought, could you put some pressure on the St. Hilda family to facilitate this peace negotiation? In return, our Dawson family is willing to support you in everything you do in the north. Actions, including, the issue of the succession of the Duke of the North." After hearing this, Ajani finally turned around. There was a faint smile on her face that was as finely carved as jade, and her eyes like autumn water were fixedly staring at Count Falco, and her eyes were filled with charm. Count Falco felt that an unknown flame suddenly rose up in his lower abdomen, which made his whole body so hot that he could hardly control himself. "Count Falco, what do you think is my position on the succession of the Duke of the North?" Ajani's lazy and slightly hoarse tone was like a swan feather, constantly stirring up Count Falco's restlessness. "Hard." Count Falco was breathing heavily, his face was red, and his eyes were fixed on Ajani as if he wanted to completely melt her with his gaze. "What are you doing?" Ajani turned her right wrist lightly, and a long purple whip flew out and struck Count Falco on the shoulder. "Ah!" Count Falco screamed. He didn't understand why Ajani suddenly turned against him, but what was even more shocking was that he was obviously a 4th level warrior, and he didn't dodge a priest's attack just now. You must know that the priest is an auxiliary profession and is not known for his combat effectiveness at all. Moreover, the whip was not very fast. If it were normal, Falco felt that he could avoid it completely. But now, he found that his legs seemed to be filled with lead, his whole body was on fire, and his brain was filled with all kinds of messy thoughts, making him unable to stay calm. "Count Falco, what do you want to say?" The smile on Ajani's face became sweeter and sweeter, and her voice was as gentle as a wife greeting her husband who returned home, but at the same time, the long whip in her hand was once again merciless. He threw it out, knocking Count Falco to the ground with a loud bang. "There's something wrong with the tea." Count Falco finally reacted, but at this time his consciousness was on the verge of collapse. In his eyes, the Ajani in front of him had completely changed from an angel to a devil, although he had no idea why the other person did this. The noise outside the window became louder and louder, and at the same time, bursts of fire gradually lit up, dispelling the darkness that shrouded the earth. Ajani took one last look at the movement outside the city, put away the long whip, and then strolled towards the door. When she reached the door, she put one hand on the handle but looked back at Count Falco who was struggling on the ground, as if she was expecting something. After a while, Count Falco finally raised his head and let out an unusual roar. His eyes had turned red as if he had completely lost his mind. When he saw Ajani at the door of the room, he immediately jumped up from the ground and rushed towards her. A smug sneer appeared at the corner of Ajani's mouth, and she immediately tore off the sleeves of her dress, revealing her smooth and white arms. At the same time, she opened the door and rushed out, crying miserably. "Count Falco! You what are you doing? Count Falco, Count Falco!" Count Anka knocked on the door for a long time but found no response at all. An alerted patrol guard came over and said, "Count Falco is out. Do you know where he went?" "Sorry, I don't know either." Count Anka was anxious and didn't know what to do for a moment. He was awakened by the noise outside the city. Winter City was built on a mountain, and Lion's Roar Castle was on the top of the mountain. Looking down, he could see the firelight in the dwarf camp outside the city. Count Anka didn't know what happened there, but he guessed that it was probably not a good thing. Seeing that Count Falco was not there, Count Anka walked towards the main castle alone. "Have Miss Vera and Viscount Angelette rested?" The guard glanced at Count Anka and then motioned for him to go in. Earl Anka quickly pushed open the heavy door and then saw Colin and Vera in the hall at first sight. "Count Anka, can't you sleep either?" Colin didn't seem to be surprised by the arrival of Count Anka and turned around to greet him with a smile. But Count Anka's heart sank because he saw Colin wearing armor with the help of Vera. "And, Viscount Angelette, what are you going to do?" Count Anka asked in a hesitant voice. Colin patted the judgment blade on his waist and said with a smile, "There are some people outside the city who are dishonest and making noise so late. I have to teach them a lesson." Cold sweat broke out on Earl Anka's forehead, and he struggled with difficulty. He said, "Lord Viscount, what is going on outside? You come with me to have a look, and you will know everything." Colin had already put on his armor at this time and kissed Vera gently on the forehead. And then sent an invitation to Count Anka. But the bad premonition in Count Anka's heart became stronger and he said urgently, "Lord Viscount, are you preparing to provoke a war?" Colin's face turned cold and he said forcefully, "The war has started from the moment you besieged the city. It started." Count Anka wanted to defend himself, but Colin was already striding out. "Miss Vera, do the St. Hilda family really want to fight to the death with the dwarves?" Earl Anka still refused to give up and shouted to Vera. However, Vera simply ignored him, took Colin's arm, and walked out together. Earl Anka stood there for a long time, his expression changed drastically, and finally, he gritted his teeth and followed. The Original Vampire. Author, Lugo Busrud. Chapter 282. Phew. Hallman pulled the long knife out of the enemy's chest, and hot blood splashed all over his face. Haha. He gasped for breath because the abdominal cramps caused by hunger almost made him unable to straighten his back. The liquid, which was either blood or sweat, blurred Hallman's eyes, making it difficult for him to clearly see what was ahead. This battle happened too suddenly and inexplicably. Hallman thought he could finally escape the fate of being a prisoner, but he didn't expect that what awaited him was not acceptance by friendly forces but an attack. He couldn't figure out why the Minim family wanted to kill them. But he was just a nobody, unable to figure out the situation and unable to reverse it. When enemies came like a tide, he had no choice but to draw his sword to resist. The long-term malnutrition during his captivity left Hallman with little fighting ability. At this time, his hands seemed to be filled with lead and he could not lift them at all. Under the darkness of night, Hallman didn't know what the current battlefield situation was like. He only knew that his comrades around him kept falling, and even the team leader had died in battle. If General Tumu hadn't been at the forefront like a god of war, these newly released dwarf prisoners would have collapsed long ago. But now they are almost on the verge of collapse. At this moment, Hallman suddenly heard a faint sound coming from behind him. Looking back, he saw the Winter City gate open again, and a fire dragon composed of countless torches emerged from the gate. The Golden Lions are here too. Hallman's heart twitched, and he had an ominous premonition that tonight would be an unbearable night for the dwarves. The Golden Lions, who left the city, did not rush to join the battlefield. Instead, they leaned against the city wall and began to form a neat military formation, as if waiting for the dwarves to decide the winner first. This kind of movement obviously made the warring dwarves realize that something was wrong, and the retreat horns immediately sounded in the Minim family's army. But at this time, the Dawson family army pursued him relentlessly because they wanted to rescue Marquis Dawson. Only the dwarf prisoners released from Winter City suddenly collapsed to the ground as if they were deflated, unable to move at all. In this battle, they were the party with the heaviest casualties. Among the more than 15,000 prisoners, those who could still breathe at this time were estimated to be less than half of the original number. After the Minim family's army gradually withdrew, the Golden Lion Legion's military formation slowly pressed forward. Put down your weapons, kneel down, and surrender. Put down your weapons, kneel down, and surrender. Hearing such a voice, Hallman could no longer raise any thoughts of resistance. He immediately threw away the long knife in his hand and knelt down obediently. On the ground, he sighed secretly at the same time. What a fart! Why did he become a prisoner again just after he was released? The dim light of morning gradually tore apart the darkness and gave light to the earth again. The armies of the Dawson family and the Minim family also temporarily stopped fighting and entered a tense confrontation stage. In fact, the moment he saw the Golden Lions leaving the city, Marquis Menham immediately regretted his decision. Although he was reluctant to admit it, he also understood that he might have been fooled. So, while leading his army to slowly retreat away from Winter City, he sent envoys to the Dawson family army to demand reconciliation. At this time, Wells Dawson, who commanded the Dawson family's army, immediately made a request. The only possibility of reconciliation was that the Menham family immediately released Marquis Dawson and compensated the Dawson family for their losses. However, at this time, the Marquis of Menham had other thoughts. He knew very well that, after a night of melee, the relationship between the Dawson family and the Menham family had been completely broken. Even if he really followed Wells's request and released Marquis Dawson and compensated for the losses, it would be impossible for the two families to make peace. The relationship was restored as before. The seeds of distrust have been planted so deeply that it will be extremely difficult to eliminate them. Once the two major dwarf families can no longer work together, they will no longer be able to gain the upper hand when facing the St. Hilda family. Even after a night of melee, the dwarf coalition, which is extremely tired and wary of each other, may not be able to defeat the St. Hilda family. It may not be the enemy of the Golden Lions. At this time, what Marquis Menham was thinking about was how to end it. The peace negotiation conditions originally proposed by the St. Hilda family are not unacceptable to him now. Marquis Dawson seemed to see something in Marquis Menham's uncertain eyes and immediately said, "If you want to hand me over in exchange for the St. Hilda family's understanding, you are just asking for your own death." Marquis Menham's heart moved, and he asked in a deep voice, "Why?" Marquis Dawson chuckled and said, "Don't you understand yet? The St. Hilda family has no intention of negotiating with us from the beginning. They can't tolerate it at all. The dwarves established an independent country in the north. Therefore, the tactics of sowing discord against us are one after another, one after another. If you hand me over and even combine with the Golden Lion army to defeat the Dawson family's army, do you think Shen 11 will let the Da family go because of this? No. They will definitely find ways to get rid of the Menham family too. By then, without the help of the Dawson family, are you sure the Menham family can face the St. Hilda family alone?" Marquis Menham suddenly fell silent. Upon seeing this, Marquis Dawson immediately struck while the iron was hot and said, "So, the Dawson family and the Menham family are the existences of both prosperity and loss. Only by uniting our two families can the dwarves gain a foothold in the north." But Marquis Menham did not agree immediately. Instead, he frowned and asked, "Marquis Dawson, do you think I can still trust you after what happened last night, Marquis?" Dawson took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, "I can promise that as long as you let me go back, I will immediately reign in the army and never allow them to attack you. Moreover, I can also send Falco to you." Marquis Menham's eyes narrowed, and then he felt a little moved. He knew that Count Falco was the heir recognized by Marquis Dawson, and this kind of behavior was more binding than a simple verbal promise. But then he frowned again. "Isn't Count Falco in Winter City now? He has probably been detained by the St. Hilda family. Why did you hand him over to me, Marquis?" Dawson rolled his eyes and immediately said, "Well then, let me go, and I will hand Wells over to you as a hostage." Marquis Menham chuckled, shook his head, and said, "Do you think I'm stupid? That boy Wells doesn't take your attention at all. I guess you won't feel bad if I kill him." Marquis Dawson said helplessly, "Then what are you going to do?" The Marquis of Menham was lost in thought. But at this moment, the army of the Golden Lion army had already caught up with them, and their front line was directed at the Menham family. On the other side, the army of the Uman family also arrived, and the target was the Dawson family's army, but the difference is that the Uman family's army just formed a formation and had no intention of attacking. It seems that it is just guarding the Dawson family and asking them not to act rashly. Here is the Golden Lion army. The horn of attack has already sounded. Seeing this situation, Marquis Menham immediately ordered the army to prepare for the battle. At the same time, he looked at Marquis Dawson coldly and said sarcastically, "You still said that you were talking to Shensi. The Da family has no secret connection, so why did the Golden Lion attack my army alone but not yours?" Marquis Dawson sighed, as if he were a little frustrated. "If you are always confused by the St. Hilda family's alienation methods, then there is really no need for us to continue to cooperate. The dream of the dwarves to establish a nation, haha, maybe, as Marquis Garcia said, it is really just a joke." Speaking of this, Marquis Dawson closed his eyes with a look of sadness on his face, as if he didn't want to say anything anymore. Marquis Menham's face was gloomy, but with the enemy in front of him, he was not allowed to think too much, so he had to put everything aside for the time being. Distracted thoughts focused on dealing with the attack of the Golden Lion army. Soon, the forward troops of the two armies met head-on. The sound of killing instantly filled the wilderness.